Welcome to Season 4 of the Vulnerable Power Show, a deep dive into the heart and soul of leadership, where we spotlight visionary leaders, spiritual entrepreneurs, innovative executives, and New Earth pioneers who have all done the inner work and soul searching to transform and step into their greater calling and mission, here to make a big impact for collective good. We will share and explore vulnerable insights and potent wisdom in our heart-centered dialogues, so you too can be equipped for the future paradigm unfolding today. Be empowered with the skills, tools, and practices so you too can do the transformative work and be the ascending leader you came here to be. Together, let's bring more heart and soul back to leadership around the world. Greetings, everybody. Greetings and welcome to the Season 4 kickoff of the Vulnerable Power Show. We are very excited here on a new moon day to start this fourth year of a show that is an extension of my mission that I started, as I said, 4 years ago. And I never thought 4 years later I'd be still doing a show, let alone doing a show, let alone spotlighting guests from all around the world that are demonstrating the inner work and soul searching, bringing heart and soul to their lives so they could really step up and follow their calling and step into a mission-driven lifestyle to make a collective impact. So if you've never joined us before, welcome back. And today I am very excited to have a returning guest from the second season and someone who has been very seminal in my own journey of activating and really owning my genius and my gifts, Manya. And she was also very vital in the introduction to some of the guests for this upcoming season that you all will see. So if you all haven't seen Manya's initial episode at the end of season 2, please do check it out. Without further ado, I wanted to say hello formally to you on camera. Thank you for coming back, Manya, as today we're really going to dive into a more practical topic, with such advanced topics that her and I both teach. We're going to talk about how do you respark your creativity and imagination? How do you really activate your extrasensory gifts? And we're going to really ground it in everyday practical reality. We're going to apply these spiritual sciences for practical results for all of you visionary leaders. So Manya, how you doing today? How's the world of Miss Manya over across the pond?
Hi Has, thank you for having me back on the show. So I wanted to say that first of all. And I'm very excited as how I'm doing right now. I feel very excited, very inspired, and I'm really looking forward to where this is going to go and what we're going to be sharing with our audience.
Yeah, a lot of this is truly, as I said, is a testament to what I have learned being in the space with you as a co-creator, as a friend, as a colleague, and a partner. And really, we didn't know what we were going to talk about. We had an idea of, okay, let's tap more into creativity and imagination. And then Manya pinged me a few days ago and said, you know what, Haas, I feel like we should really expand on something that you and I have really explored, which is this notion of this journey that we had to take, her and I, that intersected with inner child healing, that intersected with as we grow up, let's say, as we lose touch with parts of ourselves in adulthood, as we go on with our daily responsibilities. And what does it take to get back there? What does it take to really reactivate this creative life force? And this word that's thrown around a lot these days, innovation, creativity, and imagination. So really exciting stuff. And I feel like you take the lead. Where do you feel we should start? Where do you want to kind of set the tone for today? And then we can kind of riff and go from there.
Well, I feel like the starting point really is one of the things I'm really passionate about, which is like liberating creative flow. And obviously I felt like it would be a good place to start to talk a little bit more about what I mean when I'm saying creative flow as well. So our audience kind of understand what the sort of where we're coming from, because there are so many components then into this healing journey that really allows people to step into their leadership role and to also fulfill their soul mission and vision. And it all starts with this creative flow. So when I'm referring to this sort of creative flow, then I'm using that word to really explain this kind of like the energy that flows up and down our spinal column, which is our receptor between all of our bodies. So like our physical body, our mental body, our emotional bodies, spiritual bodies, and ultimately our divine gateway or our divine blueprint source point, like our natural essence. And so this energy sort of travels up and down, which another way I refer to that is our golden thread. So when I'm referring to the creative flow and sort of tapping back into our creativity and our imagination, there's kind of like a correlation here between then this flow of energy that we also then need to irrigate and tap into and irrigate. I use this word, which is one of the words that I've actually heard you use before as well.
So let's slow down. Let's slow down for a second. So I love this. So liberating creative flow. Liberating creative flow. And then, yeah, this is interesting that you're kind of intuiting and bringing forth the spine, because you and I have talked quite a bit before about this, and there's a lot of teachers in the ancient times, you know, and somebody as recent as Yogananda used to talk about the bioelectromagnetic energy that travels up and down the spine. Some call it Kundalini. I've actually had to, as you know, and some of the audience has heard, if they're been through this journey the last 4 years, about my own cerebral spinal fluid, which is the liquid that actually biomedically travels up and down the spine, that correlates, I believe, to what you're talking about. So, okay, so you're talking about this energy comes down, it then is then encapsulated in the spine. And so talk to us about what is this creative flow? Is it the same thing as creativity? Would you say they're synonymous?
That's a kind of very interesting question. I would say yes. I would say that there are multiple aspects on a multidimensional level to do with creativity.
Okay.
And creative flow very much kind of leans towards the general consensus of what we mean by being creative. It's kind of like thinking outside the box, being open to new possibilities. It's our imagination. It's all of the mystery of the unknown, and it's kind of like the exploration of that, which obviously leans towards innovation, visualization, you know, living and being differently, especially when we're entering in like you know a huge shift in the paradigm. It's like a new, you know, new foundations are going to be built. And so creativity and the creative flow, they are, you know, they do correlate with each other. And then I sort of added a few other things that sort of come in to the creative flow. And a lot of obviously the work that I do is, you know, is multidimensional. So I kind of do use that word a lot. And
what do you mean by that?
Well, so this is
let's unpack more of this today. Yeah.
When I refer to us as being a multidimensional being, a lot of people would obviously, you know, perceive this as something where I'm meaning outside of ourselves, when actually I'm referring to we are in our actual form and all of the different bodies that we have, like our emotional, spiritual, spiritual. We are multidimensional in the form that we are in. And actually, the way that I perceive the dimensions, for example, I would see the 10th dimension as our spinal column, which is this access, and the 11th dimension is the fluid that is traveling to and from. Yeah. So that's how I perceive it. And then that's what I'm meaning when I say this word multidimensional. It's also looking at things in the biophysical sense on a cellular level, as well as then the formless aspects that also make up who we are, which is obviously a reference to our morphogenetic.
Like the layers almost is what I'm hearing. So you're talking the layers within us, the dimensionality within us that then corresponds to the dimensionality outside of us. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
So slow down. So then this 10th dimension, since you already, and I know I'm interjecting, so I appreciate your flowing with me, the spine, and then you said 10th dimension. So for everybody's sake, because even for somebody as advanced as me, you've blown my gaskets before because of some of the things that you channel and you bring through. So you mentioned spine in terms of liberating creative flow. We're starting to unpack creativity, and here we are on multidimensionality within, and then also obviously a higher dimensionality correspondent outside. So up there, we would call it the 10th dimension. And then you said then the spine is the inner correspondence. Is that accurate? More or less? Am I paraphrasing you accurately?
Yeah, basically, there is certain how I sort of perceive it, and this is through my own sort of research and my own sort of learnings, and what resonated the most that correlates to what I'm downloading and birthing through is that there are dimensional levels of awareness which are existing in the formless aspect. So, for example, the 8th and 9th dimension would be sound and light. where we sound and light codes or access that. And then the 10th dimension actually is what brings it back, because our spinal column is part of this golden thread. The 11th dimension then is water and fluid. So obviously a lot of our body, and you talked about obviously our spinal fluid, and that's the receptor to carry the information up and down. And so we have here how all the multidimensional layers, they all sort of come back into us. And part of accessing or liberating our creative flow, dissolving those blocks so that we can step into embodied leadership, is to obviously address the healing that may be needed in all of these layers. And the root cause, of a healing will actually be in the spinal column. Now, the nerves and the muscles and whatever may manifest in the body could be an aspect of it, which then obviously needs to be healed. The root of even wherever that pain is showing up is actually somewhere along this spinal column. So that is ultimately where the healing would need to take place, but at the same time and almost simultaneously as you address all of the other layers. And that's what's needed for like a holistic kind of transformational lasting impact. And it's encapsulating all of these layers within the healing and addressing that root cause, which will be a blockage along the spinal column, which say a lot of practitioners may not address in their modality. They might only be sort of tapping in on one or two of those.
So hold on, let's unpack some more of this. So, okay, because you're going really high level, really quick, which I appreciate. So let's start to unpack it depending on where the audience is. Some of this may be kind of flying over their proverbial clearance levels, as I like to call it. Okay, so it sounds like what you're saying is, okay, so the correspondence is in the spine, which makes sense because you have the polyvagal system everybody's talking about now, and then you have the proverbial tree of the nervous system that travels around the spinal column, and that's the main gate, let's say column or conduit. So sounds like what you're saying is that there is a correspondence to the stuck energies. And then obviously people getting stagnant in their creativity, getting disconnected, losing sight of, let's say, these inner dimensions or these inner aspects. And then one other thing is when we are glossing over stuff, so I want to kind of slow down and put some cogency as I like to do on these episodes. So one of the things you said earlier, real quick, to kind of put some more proverbial bows on what we're unpacking here. The creativity, you said something interesting. You said that, yeah, it's part of it is opening to new possibilities. Part of it is connecting to the mystery or the beyond. So what I'm almost seeing based on the way you're presenting it is the engineering of the flow of this current of life force, let's say, or this creative life force, is that it's almost like what many call the 0 point field, right? The great mystery, the field of intelligence. That is where the new comes from. And so if we're then not allowing that energy to flow into us through these different, let's say, inner mechanisms, which are alluding to the spinal column and talking about healing and then how that interrupts the blockages that correspond to some of the spinal blockages of the flow. So it sounds to me like, and I do remember Yogananda saying this somewhat, and other ancient spiritual scientists and the teachings of the ancient masters that you and I unpack a lot these days when we teach. Yogananda specifically, if I'm not mistaken, said something similar and analogous to what you're saying, which is the spinal column is like almost like what's the word? It's almost like I'm looking at it as like Tesla's tower, of the energy that would travel up and down it. And then I think he would talk a lot about some of these ancient mystics and masters would talk a lot about in the spiritual sciences, the medulla oblongata, the pineal gland, and all this, which are then different, let's say, mechanisms on top of this big spinal, let's say, again, transmitter or whatever you want to call it. We're not being precise here, engineering speak wise. So far, so good. Am I?
Yeah, basically, okay. It's all this interconnection, isn't it? It's how I'm sort of seeing it. So this is like my truth that I'm sharing, I guess. And to reconnect to creativity, imagination, and also our extrasensory gifts, which then is like stepping into the new and to do things in a new way, it requires us to clear these blocks in all of these layers. So that is addressing the biophysical symptoms at a cellular level. It's the mental, it's how we're thinking and perceiving. It's our emotional body, which is where we hold the stories, which could be self-value, worth, betrayal, abuse, trauma. Our spiritual, which is our beliefs. And then ultimately we have our original kind of, original essence and source point, our original blueprint, which is contained within our morphogenetic sort of field. So and yes, absolutely, there's, once we clear those blocks and we have like that flow, then we start being able to do things different, which takes us out of being stuck in cycles, loops, and patterns.
Well, before we get there, let's kind of, again, let's bring more of a step-by-step for my own sake and for the audience's sake too. So then, okay, so it seems, okay, so let's kind of back up a little bit. So here we are, we're talking about creative flow, we're talking about creativity, multidimensionality, and you said another word, embodied, because here you're touching upon healing, the H word that we talk so much about on this show. What do you mean by embodied? I'm gonna, as you know, do something on that this season. What do you mean by embodied, since you touched on that word?
I feel like embodiment is really coming back into being as close to our essence and our blueprint and our original blueprint that is feasible, in our biophysical suits, basically. So okay. It's embodying the all aspects of ourselves in the extraordinary multidimensional being that we actually are, and also the practicalities of showing up that way on a consistent daily basis. So it's living, breathing what we believe and what we practice.
So back it up. What did that look like for you?
So for me personally, that would look like a commitment and a self-discipline in the daily practices that are supporting the flow of being consistent and lasting, and to bring awareness and to spot when there's stagnant energies building up, and then obviously to implement the practices, tools, and techniques in order to shift it, so that I'm dissolving as I go, and I'm not creating loops. It's closing those loops so that I'm allowing something new to be birthed through.
So you're talking about presencing, getting more embodied. So what did that look like for you before? Sorry, I misspoke. So in other words, for those in the audience that you're describing what they should be, and you're describing a lot of the mechanics out the gate, which I appreciate, a lot of the spiritual sciences that you're bringing forth. Let's bring it to the practical. What did it look like for you? What do you mean by embodied? So I'm going to play devil's advocate, as I often do on the show. What do you mean by embodied? I don't understand. I still don't follow, because what did that look like for you? What was your journey through learning about this?
Yeah, so when I wasn't embodied, then I would say I had traits of being disassociated, joining the rat race, running on autopilot, burning out, keep going and going and going. Like, there were parts of me that I wasn't tapped into. I had no idea that my body was not coping with the way that I was living, because I wasn't really tapping into what it was presenting to me. I was ignoring it. I was, brushing it aside. I wasn't really addressing things. And I also wasn't actually communicating with my body to go, hey, what's up? Is my lifestyle not suiting you? And things like this. So self-care, prioritization. I wasn't, and in that way, that's what I'm meaning in my journey of when I wasn't embodied, which obviously is very different to how I am now. Because when you're not embodied, you're operating on a whole different system to your original blueprint, and that's what is creating the conflict within. That's why we have these flare-ups, because our body is trying to get our attention. It's not intentionally working against us. It's intentionally working with us to kind of give us a shout out to go, hey, this needs to be addressed. And those are aspects of not being embodied, because if we were, then the symptoms wouldn't have progressed as much as they had. So obviously
we'll get there. Hold on. Again, let's keep slowing it down. So I like this. So it sounds like what you're saying, and thank you. So it sounds like what you're saying is the before was more of, you classified it as disassociation, which is a pretty accurate word these days. So then it sounds like it's more of, what you mean by embodiment is being in tune with the inner as well as the body itself, because obviously the word embody implies the body. It also means the inner landscape, because you're alluding to the mental landscape, the heart landscape, aka the emotional landscape, as well as the energetic landscape. And I agree, there's a lot of that happens internally. So you're talking to be more in tune, which does require something that is counterintuitive to a busy leader lifestyle, to a single co-parenting mom lifestyle, a mompreneur, let's call it. Because there seems to be a catch-22 these days. I know I experienced it myself, where you have to actually create the time to slow down, to really look at and embody and see some of the multidimensionality. And then to what we're going to unpack in a moment, what you keep talking about, blockages and interferences. We need to, again, unpack more of these mechanical words and technical speak for the audience's sake. So it sounds like there is an inevitable, let's say, catch-22, because it's and that's one of our intentions for today, is how do I, in my day-to-day hustle bustle, because it can be difficult to apply these theories that we're starting to unpack already, and we're going to get into the practical tips and tools, and you're going to obviously demonstrate some of more of your genius today that you started to preview the last time you were on the show. So let's start talking about, I guess, what do you mean by interferences, blockages? Because so now that we've unpacked what you mean by liberating, well, before we continue, is there anything so far that, because I know I keep kind of unpacking stuff and interjecting, so I appreciate your patience as we're like unpacking this throughout the episode as we're flowing. Is there anything else so far? Is there anything I'm missing? Anything that I'm overstepping or miscommunicating?
No, I think you're beautifully presenting, the very things that I'm addressing, and yes, I mean, obviously then this all leans towards those blocks and those interferences and how they can, present in adulthood or as leaders and stuff. And as you were, saying, it's that catch-22.
What was that like, before you break down the technical, what was that like for you? I know on the first episode you were here, we talked about your journey and the divorce and all the stuff in your awakening journey and the proverbial dark night and the inner work you've done to arrive at this zone of genius that you're speaking to today. What did that look like in terms of not embodiment as an entrepreneur? Let's kind of hone in on that, something that you and I have talked about a lot when we do our teaching together, when we create together and do different recordings and stuff. What did that look like for you as a entrepreneur, both before, which I don't believe you touched upon in the first episode you were on? What did it look like as an entrepreneur before and after this inner work, in terms of, was there any benefit to applying this stuff? And if so, how? In terms of productivity, energy management, because I know when I first met you, you were getting I think you were 2 years into your art work, your soul artwork, and here you are 3.5 years later. You've come a long way, as you talked about on the last episode. So what did it look like in the nuts and bolts, in the muggledom of it before?
I would say that I was, feeling run down, always tired, never felt like I was getting enough time to myself, no time for self-care. So I was saying a lot of stories to myself, and I was also, I would say, separating my my creativity and imagination from family life, which this is before, and then obviously we can talk about then, like, what I did to like weave all these things together. And on a physical level, like, I mean, I was like, becoming emancipated because I wasn't taking in as many calories as I was burning off, because I was like juggling so many sort of tasks and responsibilities. I was then, probably, well, I would say I definitely was then at times then disassociating in my art, which is when I started to notice the how art can be used differently. So you have escaping, or you can have it as part of tapping in intuitively, so there was like a lot of things that I started to have an awareness to. And most of that started with me going, well, who says it should be this way? Who's told us that we're supposed, who's told us that if we're juggling work and we're running a family and we have children, who has told us that it's supposed to be exhausting or tired or never having enough time? So it's interesting how we buy into the stories. you know, and some of those stories can start, you know, they get projected onto us by our parents, or obviously we join a collective story that's being told,
Hmm.
you know. And yeah,
So it sounds like it's rationalizing. So then you were living in that rationalization, it sounds like.
I would say I was definitely buying into certain things, and then 2 years in, I was like, hang on, you know, being a parent, there's got to be a different way of doing this.
So talk to us about what your when you started your business, what your lifestyle looked like as far as the hours you were working, and again to give us a before and after encapsulation, because I don't recall you touching on this in the first episode you were on. I think we talked more on the interpersonal, not as much as the entrepreneur Manya. So what did it look like in far as, because you had 3 kids, you're working in a proverbial 9 to 5, you know, you had a marriage and all this. So how did you get your art entrepreneurial gig off the ground in terms of obviously burned out, and you're touching on all these symptoms beautifully. You know, we talked about it in the last 3-4 years. We had Tanya the first season, who you've met, and all of this good stuff. So for you personally, give us a snapshot of what was it like being Manya, starting a business as a, let's call it a mompreneur.
Yeah, I mean, at my busiest, I had 3 children that were 3 years old and under. So that included a newborn. So obviously up in the night and stuff. So I was really running on very little sleep, maybe 4 hours straight.
Oh, you were
You
doing
know,
all this at night,
so well,
more or
if
less.
I, it, no, I did start to manage it a little bit better. What I did, so it was really, I started to work out a different way of working when I had my daughter, who was my youngest child, because when you start settling in like a baby into sleeping through, you do it gradually. So for example, you know, you put them to bed at 11 o'clock at night, and then, you know, they may wake up at 2 for a feed, and then, you know, sometimes you can get through to nearly 7, and then you extend the times. So I started to have a really good sort of period of time between about 11:30 and 5:30 where I was getting her to sleep. Now, instead of me going to bed at 9:30 or 10 knowing I'll be up, I would stay up, and so obviously until I got to 11:30 or 12 if need be. Now, I would then settle my other 2 down to sleep at around, say, 7:30, 8. And I would then use that time. I'd be like, right, this is my time. And that's what I would spend doing my
So
artwork.
you did it in chunks, it sounds like, which is a
I
big
did it
time
in
management tool.
chunks. And what I then did was I had, you know, already having had 2 children. So I was already up maybe once in the night with each of them, settling them back down because they were also small, like they were 1 and 2, or, you know, 3 and 2. Then I kind of I was getting used to not having as much sleep, put it like that. And instead of addressing that issue, I would then start utilizing my time. This is what then led to burnout, because I wasn't taking enough care for myself, and I was reapplying it in a different way. And that was where my disassociation started to come about. So this was like my personal journey saw me utilize my art as me time, which then was extending myself in a body way physically when I shouldn't have. And then I was disassociating because I would enjoy having the space away from this busyness of family roles and responsibilities. Into an extent, I was then escaping from that situation. So that was how it presented in, like, you know, in a very unaligned way.
So
You know, this is definitely
what would
not a
you
way to.
say? Yeah, I appreciate that. What would you say to Manya then?
I would probably say
Or let me
that
rephrase that. How would you do it differently? Either variation of that.
well, I started to do it different, you know, within a short space of time. So within about a year, a couple of years, I started to understand more about what I was doing. And I was like, okay, this isn't, you know, one of the reasons why also I was doing the art and in effect using it for disassociating or escaping is because actually I would get my connection that way intuitively. And so I started to like really lean in on that to recharge me up. What I was lacking was the knowledge of how to use other ways to charge my energy, which is obviously when we look at body work or energy work within the body, and how we can apply energy to the body in order to do.
Well, hold on. So I like this. So you're touching on something that is a fascinating subject, right? Escapism. so slow down here. So only way to feel connected was through your art. Talk to us about that. What do you mean by that?
So,
What do you mean by connection?
okay, so the
And how
connection.
was that fulfilling? Because you're almost alluding to something that's close to what drug addicts seek.
Okay, yes, I mean, I could definitely see how I was stepping into.
I think this is more common than people realize, this form of disassociation, and then how these, let's say, escapism or coping mechanisms come about. Because in the human condition, very few people actually are fulfilled. They're all seeking like this proverbial teat. And so what you're talking about is in your experience, you got, let's say, droplets of fulfillment through this. So that's what I want to unpack. What did that look like? How was that? Not now, Manya
No,
then, not what Manya knows now. We'll get to that. Yeah.
back then it was in the stillness where I would then create, where I would be tapping into my intuition, and also I would be opening up the stream of communication, let's say with my higher selves, or my soul, and as I said, my intuition. So inspiration would come through, or my aha moments, and it was in that stillness, and that's obviously what I was seeking. So I became very fixed that this is how I do it, like, and then I would then obviously continue that when I was then actually not addressing, the mental, my
Mm.
physical, I was like,
So you were getting that fix, let's call it, right?
yeah.
So you were getting that fix. And then, so this is going to be interesting because I'm seeing a formula coming about. Because for me, one of my first YouTube videos, which is where this show is housed on YouTube, was, and I didn't know it was going to be a channel and I was going to be a teacher, was literally up in the mountain, which you've gone to, and we've done energy work up there. And literally, I videoed stillness, and lo and behold, it was, well, first in, let's say, a series of how do leaders do this inner alchemy work. And it came through very inspired. So here we are. It comes out a lot on the show, and obviously in other teachings and in the work we do. So it seems like this, in the work we're about to unpack for people, in terms of how, if you're a busy leader, or let's say you're at the beginning, you're at the advanced stage, wherever you are, you got to do this work, find the stillness. Seems like stillness is a big thing. So before we get to the formula, it sounded like you're getting this fix. The first step was stillness. And then what it brought you sounds like a sigh of relief, for lack of a better description. It was almost like, here I have my daily, let's call it muggly life, which is I'm, living two separate lives, as you said. Many people on the show talked about that. And then you had all these stories and rationalizations. And then here we are on the topic of escapism. So it sounds like you would shut everything, go over here, and then step one, stillness. And then it sounded like you were like, huh. I mean, more or less, the energetics of my encapsulation of the words is, huh, which I would say is that accurate?
I would say that's very accurate. Yeah.
I would say
Yeah.
that's what runners that are addicted to ultra marathons seek. So it's interesting because we all have it different ways, different, let's say, avenues. The question is, and I sense we're going to be unpacking this today, is how do you do it in a healthy, organic, let's say, natural, sustainable way? And then what you're already bringing out on the show already really brilliantly is versus a non-sustainable or a forced way, or going against the grain, trying to force the flow and the flow of energies, etc. So what? Okay, so sorry. So what? When you're doing that, did you know? Oh, I'm doing this. I'm escaping. Did you have any semblance of understanding, old Manya, looking back?
Uh, I would say that I was conveniently feeling and seeing it to be connecting. And it wasn't until after I had looked at these things and addressed them and obviously made changes that I can look back now and go, okay, that was escapism and that was disassociation. At the time, I had convinced myself, the story, I'm connecting.
What would you say is the difference then? What's the difference between a connecting in an escapist way versus, let's not use the word connect, right? Because I saw a quote the other day, and let me see if I can bring it up right now. I wasn't planning on bringing it up. I think I have it handy. I feel like I do. where it was actually about meditation. And I feel it's very inspired because I didn't expect this, as we oftentimes do on the show. And this is good. We came into this like, let's see where we go. My thing is acting up. Where are you? There we go. And so I'm going to bring this quote out. And it seems like you're saying connecting, you're saying art. As I alluded to, some people are runners. For some people, it's working out. For some people, it may be, if it's a negative, or let's say destructive, drugs. They chase the dragon, as opium addicts will call it. I'll even use meditation, which is, here's the quote. Embodiment is the new mindfulness. Embodiment is the new mindfulness. Much has been written about the art of mindfulness, especially focusing on how to create wriggle room between an event and our reaction to it. We are asked to consider who is the I that experiences the event. And this quote goes on, all of this is valid, important work that takes us deeper into the seat of this silent witness, so that we can be, this gets into Viktor Frankl, emotional resiliency, stuff that, we could talk about all on and on. It can be a tremendous tool for moving through difficult passages with equanimity. And the author, I think her name is Tamara, goes on to say, more often than not, I see this practice creating a kind of disassociation or detachment from the feeling of life, especially in folks who haven't done the hard and dirty work of integrating their shadow. Meditation, so let's use connection, meditation, running, opium, whatever, plug in your variable here. Meditation can be used like any other form of escapism to circumvent the true encounter with our less than desirable inner and outer experiences. So it sounds like you weren't fulfilled, which is often the case when we run towards escapism and we disassociate, and then we convince ourselves, oh no, I'm blissing out, or oh no, I'm making progress. And here she goes on real quick, and I'm sorry to speak so much. The result of this brand of presence often creates the opposite of what it intends. Instead of fostering oneness, it actually feeds separation we're trying to heal by creating an image of spirituality that is unattainable. The focus of enlightenment should be on embodiment and getting closer to the messy business of being human. And last quick thing, if you're doing it right, presence is not detaching. It actually sensitizes you to the environment and puts you smack dab in the middle of it all. Is that a good encapsulation of what you were doing?
When you were saying, on reflection, what would be the difference between, connecting and then escapism, and I was going to say that word separation, is to do with the fact that we're separating ourselves from what it is and the lived experience. And obviously then it becomes a false connection. It's like, as you said, we it's almost as if we become addicted to the story we're telling ourselves. Oh, I have to do this because this makes me feel, and we remove, it's like we separate. Now, obviously I was separating from the biophysical, my body, I wasn't listening. I was separating from my mental, I was separating from my emotional, and I was going straight to spiritual in some ways, you could say. So that in itself,
it's a floating head, essentially. It's a floating head.
That in itself, that comes back to then the fact that the journey itself is a holistic one, because we have to address all of these different layers for lasting impact. And that's what wasn't that's what wasn't happening. It wasn't lasting. I had to keep doing it. I had to keep living that way.
Well, there you go. Drug addict. I mean, that essentially is what I feel like when we met. I think you saw this judgment in me, a lot of the new age movement and the spiritual movement, which is probably why I had my own resistance. It's probably why some people listening to this may have their resistance now, because it's ungrounded. And I love this word, because the quote actually was funny, because as I read it, I was like, oh, you've mentioned separate. And so it's very synchronous. You said something really beautiful. You're saying a lot of beautiful things. Lived experience. It separates us from lived experience. Earlier, you said I live separate lives. A lot of the people I brought on the show the first couple of seasons, even yourself included, we had two lives. We came out of the proverbial closet and we unified it. That's the last season, and this season, stepping into the calling. I love this. It separates us from the lived experience. You're actually not living. You're thinking you're living, or you're convincing yourself, or you're saying a story. And let's get into this. Because I feel this gets into the early child healing work, the adverse child experiences, and the impacts they have on us, which we call healing. It's really creativity, as far as me and your journeys were. And I sense today's theme of the episode. So what do I mean by this? I don't think I've actually said this. I was planning on doing this in the embodiment episode I'm intending to do this season solo, which you all can look forward to. There'll be a special episode where I'll talk all about embodiment by my lonesome, embodying embodiment alone. And one of the things I was planning on doing on that episode down the line in the season, and we'll bring it out now as well, and I want to hear yours, was for me, my breakthrough of when I realized, oh shit, I'm telling a story. I've rationalized. Here's Haas as a energy body, his soul, his divine blueprint that you've alluded to, and we've unpacked a bit. And here's his human experience, or your words, lived experience, the human Haas, right? The vessel, the meat suit. And there was a disconnect. And it came from, and you've heard this, and I've taught this before, so some in the audience who may have come to my workshops have heard this, that I was with that shaman teacher, Esther Jenkins, God bless you if you're still around. And she literally, you've heard this from me, I had told so many stories of all the emotions. She kept asking, what was your childhood like? How did you feel, right? So talk about separating yourself from a lived experience, right? And I kept telling stories, and she stopped me. And I know you've heard this, so for the audience's sake, I'm slowing it down. And there were 6 Haas's, 6 stories, 6 justifications, rationalizations between myself and the rage that I kept talking about that I had carried in my human body, in my mind, in my heart, in my cells, and I wasn't feeling, sensing it, embodying it, right? And so we talk about multidimensionality, and then she beautifully said, Haas, look at what you've done here. That was for me, probably, that was 2017. That was the biggest, oh my God, moment. As far as this specific topic that we're highlighting and we're unpacking, it, especially correlated to today's theme of resparking the creativity, imagination, especially this topic of extrasensory gifts and genius, which has come out a lot this season, and is coming out more and more with these guests. So what was yours? What was your, or maybe you had several or a couple that led up to it. What was your, oh my God, moment of, or maybe there were several, as I said, between you and then going, oh, wow, I'm escaping. I'm not actually connecting. When did that come about? And how did it come about, let's say?
I feel like that really started to show itself a little bit more when I had to sit and see the issues that were playing out in my marriage. So it was almost as if I started to understand that I hadn't, in my human form anyway, I hadn't been able to figure out a way out of the situation that I was in. Like it seemed so entwined and tangled, very complicated. So then it became survival. I'm like, okay, well, what can get me through, my day? And so I started to see more of that, because they reached a point where you can't ignore when your life is not in alignment, is going to get louder until you sit and go, oh, okay. And you have to then work on all of these layers in order to get the clarity then of the steps to move forward, which is then, is like we're talking about doing that deeper inner work. You have to actually sit in it in order to then go through it and find that path of clarity, which comes from going within and going through. You can't go around the edge.
Let's slow this down, because this is fascinating the way you're presenting this. Because I would say this is systemic of, and we're already kind of jumping ahead without knowing it, of the patterns of how this can look in terms of how leaders can get stuck or fall into these downward spirals or low vibes, let's call it. And I love this. This is what killed my brother, God rest his soul. I thought there was no way out. This entire situation seemed so complex, like a ball of, you didn't say it, I'm paraphrasing, ball of, rubber band ball, let's say a knot, ball of knots. And I stepped into survival mode. Ooh, how many clients have you had? I know I've had most of them. There's no way out. This is why we're doing this episode, if you're listening, because you don't have to be in a severe state of disassociation. You could be, oh my God, how do I follow my dream? There's no way, because I'm in the rat race or I need to make ends meet. So this can look different from various people. For me, it had all of the components. I feel for you, it had all those similar components. I need to make ends meet. I have kids, in addition to the soul fulfillment. So let's hone in on the soul fulfillment, because you said it got louder and louder. So I love this, because I feel like that is then the choice point. That is then when you go, okay, do I keep going this way, which doesn't, well, let me keep my spiral on the camera. Or do I stop it? Which is then it gets, that's the catch 22 I keep talking about, because then you're like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, it's gonna get worse. And that's why I burned out so severe. I should have seen it coming. And I went to Tony Robbins. I have Habib Sadeghi as the older brother. Deepak Chopra is a family friend. Don Miguel Ruiz is like a step away from a family friend. And I'm meeting all these people and exposed to these teachings. How come I burned out? Right? Because I didn't listen to that voice, and it was getting louder and louder. So what do you feel? What feels inspired to unpack around this for those that may be listening that were like my brother, God rest his soul, that because it looks complex. Was it complex? Let me start unpacking it this way. Was it actually complex? Right? Because earlier you said, oh my God, this seems so complex.
I feel like, a lot of us,
Yeah.
myself included, we can jump straight to how we want it to look as the outcome.
Mm.
Because our brain then tries to put together what those practical steps are to move forward to get there. If we can't find them, it then becomes a big oh my goodness, I don't even know where to start.
Mm.
And life isn't really like that, is how I see it. And for me anyway, one of the metaphors I use is that it's a bit like walking down a path that's foggy. You can see very clearly the first step. You have to take that first step, and then the next presents itself, which means that you have to sort of break things down. And there has to be less focus on the how is it going to happen, where you're focusing ultimately on how it's going to feel when you get there. So it's stopping the overthinking of the how, because that is what's creating it to look like this huge ball of yarn that's all knotted up without us even beginning to know where to start. So you have to really break it down, and the breaking it down is also part of starting that inner healing work, because the clarity comes through the irrigation of the connection. So the more that we're implementing the healing tools, the inner work, addressing these, we get the clarity of knowing what that next step actually is. And that could look very different to what our mental mind may tell us if we're running an old story.
So it sounds like you're saying this because, this is beautiful as we're unpacking it, because it can get humanly difficult. And we're going to start sharing more and more of our own personal experiences and how you've helped me in very low points, especially 2-3 years ago. And it does. It seems difficult. It can seem scary. So I love this first point. I feel like it goes back to the stillness topic that you brought up earlier, because it feels like you said, get out of your head, as how I see as one of the axioms that you're bringing forth. And it sounds like to still means to stop, means to kind of put the emergency brake on, is what I hear you saying, and go, whoa, 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 drop out of it. Go into your...
It's difficult for a lot of us to drop out of being so mentally or over analytical or overthinking, because that's ultimately that, and it isn't that easy. If you want to say to someone, well, start feeling happy, shift. I mean, you can't start doing it straight away. So there has to be some sort of in between, which then is the awareness. Oh, okay, I'm thinking that again. And you have to then break your algorithm. That's breaking our habitual behavior or pattern. And that step of breaking it can be something as simple as redirecting our mental focus to reading or doing a crossword or something that will mentally engage us. Because in that moment, the only important thing I tell my clients is that we stop fueling the negativity in that space. And that's all that we need to do in that moment. Well, then when we're more aligned, we can then look at implementing a tool where we can look at shifting the energy into something new. But to start with, we need to, break that pattern and not fuel it so it doesn't perpetuate. Because then
I like that, because you said stillness breaks the pattern, or it stops the program from running. And you sound very much like Buckminster Fuller or Tesla or Plato, very back in the days, which is you don't fuel the existing paradigm, the constructs. If you want new, you got to churn your energy this way. So this is beautiful, because this concept of there's no way out, it seems complex, survival mode, is really the spiraling that can happen. And I don't mean spiraling as in positive spiral dynamics. I mean like downward spiral, or we lose ourselves, or we get swept away, and we can mentalize, rationalize, all these things. So I love this, because what you're saying is, whoa, break all of that by stopping, stilling. And I love what you're saying, because undertones of what you're saying is alluding to almost yin-based practices. This notion of receptivity, allowing, trust, knowing this too shall pass. There's a lot of equanimity undertones and mindfulness undertones in what you're presenting to the audience. Okay, so this is okay. So let's keep going with this because it seems like we're flushing out what we intended, which is some of the patterns that can happen. So it seems like one of the patterns is the oh shit survival mode. And so anything else you would say to somebody in that mode? Like again, let's use God rest his soul, my brother. If you one of the things you already said, stillness, all these other things we're unpacking the last couple of minutes. What else, if anything, you feel inspired before we kind of unpack? How else can these patterns show up? How else can it look day to day when it gets difficult or humanly difficult for a leader to do this type of work and reactivate this creativity, reactivate this flow? Well, or better still, if there were, I'm going to say it, God bless him. Let's say your ex, very stagnant individual, God bless him. So what would you say? Either my sibling or him, very difficult, stuck personas that are very strong personalities. My brother was a strong personality in his own way. Even if he was an introvert, he was very his way kind of a style. What would you say to that kind of, I'm giving you a flavor to get your juices flowing since you're an introvert.
Maybe somebody who has very fixed perceptions.
There you go. That's a thank you. Good cogency around what I meant.
So obviously, any people that have a fixed perception, they're very rigid, they're very fixed on how it should look, which obviously is a very narrow mindset. And narrow-mindedness then is actually a block that's occurring actually above our heads and any sort of energy centers and points and stuff. So energetically, there is something around that where there's narrow-mindedness, which is actually stopping their own flow to reach clarity or inspiration. And when faced with somebody that has like a very fixed perception, I often find a good place to start is to actually be open to listening, to understand where they're coming from, because to them that their story is obviously important, and they as with most people, we like to be heard with what we're saying. So I would obviously never I don't approach people but in a very judgmental way, and I don't feel like that's very productive to do that, even for people that
I've learned that from you.
Yeah, have a point that maybe is very different to mine. It's still a valid, and I would want to show them the same value of what they are believing as much as I would want to receive that from other people too. So at that point, I would enter more of an explorative discussion. It's like, oh, okay, well, why do you think that? Where does that come from? And sort of allow them to also reflect and explore, not because I'm trying to judge them or catch them out or prove a point. So there's a difference. I'm actually doing it to understand. And then together, the point is that together we can then go, oh, okay, could there be a different way of seeing this? Or is your parents' view really the correct one? Because sometimes, that could lead them to be like, well, that's how my, dad thought, that's what I was taught. So then you start seeing how the parents have projected at the imprint. It may not even be their story. They're holding that story. And sometimes when you ask them, well, how do you really feel about that? Sometimes that the very simplest question can throw them where it's enough for them to be like, oh, okay, well, and that's kind of really, it's the exploration of that is where I want my intention of,
how do we get, that's all beautiful. How do I do that for myself? So that's how you do it for another. So then how do you extend that? Because you are really good at this and you've taught me a lot already in terms of, and it is in terms of our psychometrics and our way we show up in terms of our nature, because I tend to be more of a EJ if we were to use Myers-Briggs speak. So, and you've helped a lot in that way. So I'm curious, how does one activate and explore? Because you're almost describing a childlike wonder, what the Buddhist or mindfulness community calls it, right? Is opening into an allowing state or an exploratory state to start to circumnavigate around the story or the fixed construct, to start to even broach other alternative, let's say, views or expansive views to get unstuck, right? Because if you're fixated, and we're going to unpack, we're about to get to stuck, blocks, interferences. Before we get there, how do you activate somebody? How does somebody self-activate? So you're listening, So, and you're in the audience, if you're vulnerable in your power like I was, there was a point 2015, 2016, I said, nope, I need help. I need support. I am fixed. What do I do? So if you're there and you're ripened enough and you're listening and you're like, okay, is there a way to bring this out in myself? If anybody can do it, it's not me. It's this beautiful teacher right here. So how does one activate that within oneself? If at all. I know some things you can't do yourself. Yeah.
No, I mean, I can share like how I started to look at
Yeah.
my own constructs and my own fixed stories, or what was mine and what actually wasn't mine to carry. It wasn't
As far
mine to
as
hold.
like maybe a step by step, a couple tips, because maybe then we can imbue them with here's what you could do to start looking
One of
at
the
it.
practical tools that I started to do was kinesiology, like truth testing with my body.
Okay.
And I had to be like, okay, is this even mine? This story that I'm telling myself, is this mine, or is this being imprinted on me?
So
You
slow
know,
down. So slow down. So you're actually saying step one tool, one layer, or one practice or exercise is muscle, or I'll call it a gut test. So you're saying to actually ask themselves, so you could get advanced and learn how to muscle test, which we could cover for sake of time. Let's leave that aside. So muscle testing or gut test. Does it actually feel true? Is another way. Is that what you're saying? Is like kind of like take it out of your mind and feel into it, muscle test it or gut test it.
I would use my body as a pendulum, like literally. I mean, I'd stand up and, I would say, like, is this story mine? This story of whatever. And then obviously, yeah, I mean, my body would respond, if it was a yes, I'd lean forward. And if it was a no, I'd lean back. And I would start doing this more often when I was then willing to question even things that I had believed. And I was like, that's my starting point,
So
to
you
look at where
took,
my stories
well,
were played, where
well,
my own perceptions
sounds
were.
like you took, sorry to interject. So it sounds like you took intellect and you juxtaposed it with body intelligence. Because as
Yeah,
you know, and in case the
yeah.
audience doesn't know, you got the mind or the intellect, which we were focusing now on how do we get out of here. We haven't talked about this per se. You may know this if you don't from the audience's sake. This is the intuitive center. Everybody talks about, aka the heart and brain. And then you have the gut or the body intelligence. Sounds like you're going, if it's created here, how do I get out of here? Right. As we're talking about thought, no way out, seem complex, survival mode, fixed mindset, stuck in the mindscape. So then it sounds like one of the ways is you kind of go to the body intelligence, and you're describing using your body as a pendulum. I've used the gut test of does it feel so
Yeah.
interesting. Is that a correct encapsulation so far of this one way? Okay. Any other ways you would say to somebody listening in that regard?
Um, well, following on from that, there was a few things that I would, start doing. So because I then started to become aware of energies that could be, not mine to carry or hold, so let's say that was the stories, or if it was energies coming in that are also impacting how I was feeling or thinking, I would then start running what I call the clearing statements,
So we're talking about interferences, which we'll unpack in a moment. So in case they don't know what interference is, we'll get to that in a moment. So if they have an interference, something that, let's say, this thought process, this fixation, this survival mode, this suicidal thought, it may not actually be from within your mindscape because energies exist outside. It may actually be from external. So you said clearing statements. Did I hear you correctly? What does that mean? Unpack that. The second tool for how they can get out of their fixation. Okay, go ahead.
A clearing statement was something I came across from Access Consciousness, which they were created by Dan Deere, his name is. So I came across him when I was like, looking into like different teachings and things. So a clearing statement is basically a phrase that you would say where it will remove that particular, say, thought pattern that is not in alignment. Like it could be to do with self-value, self-worth. It could be self-judgment. I'm not good enough. It could be, oh, I'm never going to be able to achieve whatever. So things like that. So anything, and I call those like non-serving. That's not serving our highest potential. So then you create a clearing statement, very intentional, saying those words that you become aware of, which are not positive talk, self-talk. And you will then clear it back to the point of origin. So you could use different words to say from the point of origin. I tend to use across all times, realities, and dimensions. So it doesn't become important to know where the origin point was. You become intentional with saying, I'm clearing it from that point, you know. And I would do those repeatedly, and I would do them every day. And I would sort of stick, you know, post-it notes around, especially in the kitchen. So if I'm cooking, you know, and I'm waiting for something to boil, like the kettle or the, you know, the food is cooking, then I would see it, you know, and I'd read it out, and I would start implementing very practical things in a way like that. And I would then start noticing a bit more clarity come into my field
So
as a result.
sounds like these are all right. So I love it. So you're talking about clearing statements almost as if they're specific designed affirmations. And yeah, I mean, it's a command to the subconscious in the field of consciousness. So that's beautiful. So muscle test, gut test, use the body intelligence to actually determine, is this really what I really feel? Clearing statement, using these commands to really clear out, let's say, these programs, some of which there may be interferences. Anything else before we move on to what does it mean? What does it mean to be stuck, blocked, or interference? Let's start to unpack some of the technical. Anything else on this fixation topic, this notion of how do we activate self-exploration? How do we kind of ripen ourselves, for lack of a better description?
It was breaking the algorithm, I mean, interrupting the habitual behavior, like the algorithm, which I think we sort of mentioned as well. I mean, that was something then I would practically do as well. So I would shift. I knew that I couldn't ultimately change to something more positive in that moment. I knew I could do something to shift the focus in that moment. So that really would be my third practical thing that I would do.
What did that look like? So give us a flavor of what that looked like. What are examples of ways like you would shift? So what does a shift look like?
So obviously if I, you know, because this is to do with the thinking, the mental body, you know, I would employ it somewhere else. Like I would read something, you know, something that would have to actively engage my mind, and I would go and read anything. I mean, it wasn't a particularly, you know, had to be something significant as to the topic. It was more anything that could stop my brain from overthinking and perpetuating that thought process, which I had seen as non-serving to myself. And that was something I became a lot more intentional with doing in those moments. You know, that those are really my starting points. If I, you know, that then started to shift. And then obviously I would then start, you know, doing and implementing other things. So I became.
So I know we're out of order, which is fine. We're all out of order. So what do you mean by stuck? So here we are. We're kind of going to revisit this notion of the sciences you unpacked right away. You know, start of the hour. This notion of liberating the creative flow, the spine, creativity, multidimensionality. We unpacked embodiment. You know, here we got into this disassociation, escapism. How do you activate getting out of the fixation and out of that survival mode? We haven't covered the actual mechanics of what does it mean to have a stuck energy or a blocked energy or interference. So how would you then start to characterize some of these verbiages for those that are listening that may be new to all of this, or maybe are advanced and they're like, ooh, I haven't heard this before in this way, because you are essentially bringing through a very, let's say, holistic and synchronized way of doing this.
So you sort of wanting me to like name some of these blocks?
Well, how would you describe them, right? If we were to look at them, because we already unpacked, what does it mean to be, what does creative life force mean, right? And you talked about golden thread and some of the mechanics. How would you, for lack of a better description, for, you know, us as spiritual scientists, how would you describe the engineering? You know, I'm all big on the science engineering and the energy engineering, all the Arcturian stuff that I love to talk about.
So the engineering. So okay. So obviously we're all more familiar with like how a block would appear in our biophysical, you know, body, because we get a symptom, we get like a pain, don't we? We get like, you know, we have a pain or injury, you know, we're not well, you know, we have you know, headache, or we pulled a muscle, or, you know, so that on the physical level, then that's, you know, that was easy. And obviously for the most part we address the symptoms of that.
Yeah, let's leave that alone. Let's hone it in on creativity, imagination, more of the feeling. Yeah. Or
mental,
not only mental. Yeah, not
It's
only
in the perceiving. So that's where, so blocks in our mental way of thinking are going to be like, as we made a reference to, the stories or those fixed perceptions. The emotional aspect are the stories that we hold, like self-value, self-worth, betrayal, abuse, and trauma. Now, the emotional blocks are actually connected to the way that they're showing up physically in our body. So it's almost like where we store the story that is particular to do with who has betrayed us. So if we say, let's say self-value or self-worth, if we take that as the root cause, and as I was saying, if we look at the engineering, the root cause will be somewhere along on our spinal column. Now, let's say it's about self-value and self-worth. It could be then that we live experiences where a particular person, that could be a lover, a friend, our parents, our employer or employees, that are going to somehow allow that program of self-value or self-worth to be in question and then to run, where we start doubting that particular story that person is activating within us, may manifest as a pain in somewhere else in our body, because our bodies are like, it's all the veins and muscles and stuff, we're all interconnected from our spine. So it could be that, let's say, as an example, and I'm kind of making one up loosely, that one of my friends has a habit of perpetuating something that makes me feel like less valuable or less worthy somehow, and I get the pain and it appears in my hip. Now that is the emotional story I'm holding that is connected by that person. The root cause is actually in my spinal column, which comes under self-value, self-worth. So you have like these kind of trajectory points, if that's the right word, that come off, which is where we're holding it on an engineering kind of perspective. Then we're holding that. And so then we have the spiritual body, which is our belief. So then obviously, so it's a little bit like we have to, on an engineering level, we can address things localized. We also then need to like look at that, the root cause as well, because it's all interconnected, and it's our experiences with people around us that obviously will potentially run a non-serving program.
Okay, so let's slow down. Let's slow down, because you are mixing something. You are mixing something. So I'm gonna kind of unpack it, because you've kind of done this without maybe knowing it. Okay, so let's define some of this. So you have stuck, because you've used that word before. You have blockage, and then you said the word interference. Okay, so it sounds like everything you're describing, it sounded very multidimensional, so thank you. So it sounds like stuck, what you mean and define by that is it's not moving, it's not flowing. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. And then block, you then describe types of blocks. You could have a mental block in the mental subsystem. You could have an emotional block and carrying an old emotion in the emotional system. You talked about the physical system. And then, yes, you're alluding to the energetic. So a block seems to be something that's in the way, an old energy, for lack of a better description, something that's clogging the pipes, more or less.
Yeah.
Accurate? And then interference seems to be something external from you. That's not actually something that you've created, is something that's kind of jamming you up, something discordant, for lack of a better description. It's not actually in us. Is that accurate? Because that's not the programs you're running, non-serving program.
It can be triggered by an external source. Obviously, there's an access point for us to run it. So then yes, there's like a bit of both.
Okay. So then it sounds like, how this ties to then the creative life force then makes sense, because you were alluding to the spine again. So then it's the flow of energy is going to naturally happen. These are the ways then we jam it up. So then it's a matter of, as we've already started unpacking in this first hour, is then how do you clear these things up, which we've started to unpack the mental, some of the emotional, obviously the exercise, which we're going to do leading up to towards the end of today's episode, will be how do you actually do it on a more, let's say, deeper level. So this is good. So talk to us about your blockages. Give us some examples from your own personal life, please, of stuck block interference and how that looked like in terms of your creativity and imagination. and your gifts. Let's start to go into that terrain, in terms of inner child, in terms of, adulthood. What did it look like for you to have a blockage, have a stuckage, or have an interference, specifically around creativity, imagination, and your gifts?
Okay, so I would say that the biggest block that I had kind of alludes to creativity and imagination, or the expression of, was in my throat. So this obviously, impacted my confidence, in order to actually step out and be the teacher on creativity and imagination, for example. So I wouldn't be here if I hadn't had to kind of overcome those and actually, remove them, dissolve these blocks and stuff. Now, I can how that then presented itself, if we were to go way back as a child, is that I always felt like the way that I spoke or saw things was different. So when with my peers at school in particular, then I would be seen as being kind of weird, or people wouldn't really get me. So I learned to be quiet, and I learned not to speak up.
Mm.
Because I wasn't, well received, not in the sense that they were necessarily mean. It was more like they didn't really get what I was saying. And it felt like I was coming at the topic, on a whole different level to where they were at. That became more apparent. And so I kind of became the wallflower, and I took a step back. And I didn't sort of use my voice or speak up, even in class. I mean, a couple of times in class when I would answer something, I was answering something that was way off, what what they were aiming for. So I would then, I would feel embarrassed, and I would be judging myself. So then I learned to be quiet, and I learned not to really have a voice, because it was safer that way. And so I learned, if anything, that, and I became more introverted, more internal, more withdrawn from the world around me. So then this was also where I started to use my creativity and imagination as escapism. So it sort of comes back to then what I started to have to unpack a little bit later in life with that.
So you'd characterize this as a blockage or a limiting belief blockage, so a mental blockage, because it became, I would say they're both actually, because it sounds like there's also an emotional hurt tied to it, tied to the never again, which oftentimes is the case. There's an interplay between where the limiting belief or the egoic construct comes from. It's not to experience that emotion again.
Yeah, because on the mental level, there was, I was obviously, nobody wants to hear from me. I mean, there was all of these self-talk going on, which obviously connects to the root cause would have been lack of self-worth.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so then that goes to this. That goes to then, let's say, your energetic blueprint you talked about, right? Because more or less what you were talking about earlier with self-worth, one could say that's what the ancient Vedics meant with the chakras, and why oftentimes those energy portals or centers that correspond to the endocrine system, blah, blah, blah. That's why they had patterns of energies tied to them, which, correct, you astutely in your research is accurate. In my interpretation, that ties to the spinal column and all the stuff that we're bringing out.
Let's say in my throat, then the energy is coming down, which means I was getting the inspiration, the creativity, the imagination. What my challenge was to bring it into form, because it wasn't irrigating further down.
To actually do something with the energy.
Yes, to like actually embody it, you could say, or be practical with it, be grounded in it.
Well, one could say, sorry to interject, one could say, Newton, right? He sits under this tree in this meditative state. He was an occultist and member of secret society. So he obviously knew some advanced techniques of some sort back then. And yeah, I would say he was in an altered state. The apple falls. So one could say, what do you do when you have the energy come down, the download come through, right? And you're alluding to, well, if you have the blockage or the stuckage, right? And we can talk about interferences too, because I know you had them and I had them. So I appreciate us fleshing out the personal experiences so it gets even more, let's say, down to earth and relatable. It sounds like then, yeah, if you're Newton, you do something with it. What you're describing, if you have the blockage in your instance of suppression, becoming the wallflower, then utilizing it in a let's say deviant way, or deviated, diluted way, which is you're using it to escape, then yeah, you're almost describing a Newton that got the apple and said, nobody wants to hear about this apple. So we almost like have all these creative geniuses out there that are bringing through stuff that they're not sharing, and we have all of this suppressed. So it's almost like a detriment. And then here we are as a collective wondering, why aren't we innovating? Where are the innovators? Some of them are wounded. Some of them don't know. Some of them have interference, stuck, blockage, which is why creativity and imagination are so hot. So is that a good analogy? It's almost like you're describing you were the Newton that got the apple that was like, I suck. This apple is meaningless. Throw it away.
Well, it's imposter syndrome is how I would describe it. Yeah. And I feel like that can be that's something that a lot of people could relate to. It's the lack of confidence. We don't feel like, who are we to speak our teachings.
Is that all you? Or is that, let's add the layer of interference. Could that also be interference? Because you described stuck and blocked, and I know I interrupted you. So if you have more to add, also add in now interference, because you almost seem to be hinting on something that I'll share my own personal experience after you're done sharing this, which you helped me with, which is some of this may not actually be you, which then compounds it. So so here we are, you're sharing stuck and blockage. Some people like me were really effed up, had a lot of this stuff on top. It was very layered. So I also had an interference that compounded it, which we can unpack. So I'm curious, what does it look like with your if you have an interference? Because some people, the whole imposter thing is exaggerated because of interferences, let's say, or exacerbated.
I could say, a type of interference is when we're taking on the beliefs from others that have been, and then we become conditioned to believe the same thing. And this can come from our parents. So classics, you have to work hard. So then we're already like assuming that work has to be hard, or you push through it, which means that we ignore self-care or, prioritizing it. Or you have like phrases like, well, that won't make any money. So it's that dismissive attitude over like certain industries. So these could be generational and ancestral. So, that mindset or that belief, and then we take that on. And that is an interference that's occurring then within us that is in conflict with our original blueprint. And so then because of that, then it would manifest into a physical symptom. So for example, in my personal experience then, and with the throat and everything, I would get a lot of sore throats. Terrible. Tonsillitis, regularly, sore throats. I mean, it was a very, something that I suffered with a lot when I was a child. And it was always the way it first presented as an illness in my body,
well,
as well.
You're defining and epitomizing and illustrating the ACE study, which I've shared with you and I came to learn, which is now making its rounds around the world, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, which was done in a hospital. It was done in a clinical setting in a hospital where they found that most chronic, and you're hitting the nail on the head. Thank you for doing this. Every chronic adult dis-ease, not every, a lot of them, I'm not gonna, for the scientists out there, I'm not gonna arbitrarily say every, a lot, it was a high proportion and correlation, and it's dang near close to causation, is these childhood energies, block, stuck, parental. Thank you for highlighting a very muggly interference and not getting otherworldly, because I was about to take us otherworldly, so I'm glad you kept it very grounded, which is ancestral, epigenetic, family, cultural programs that we then take on as interferences that can then exacerbate the blockages. So here you are as a kid speaking up, the throat thing, you're alluding to the ACE research, which is now validating that this can then manifest in a physical way, biophysically. And go ahead. Yeah. Please keep going. Yeah. No, don't apologize. Please. Yeah.
Right, so obviously, as I said, I'd become the wallflower and I wouldn't actually speak up. That didn't stop me getting the sore throat. Now, my body wasn't working against me. It was bringing my attention to the very fact that, I'm supposed to use my voice. And it wanted me to use my voice. So it had to do something to get my attention to this area, So it's a little bit like our bodies aren't working against us. It's not attacking itself. Our body is actually highlighting where we need to look at because something is not matching our blueprint.
Well, you said it earlier. It got louder, only you were talking in a different context. You were speaking of the living in survival mode. I would say that's the epitome of what has happened in society, which this ACE study is touching upon. We have the trauma epidemic, which I've talked about ad nauseum over the last 4 years, and going into this new season that we're kicking off here today. It's interesting because, yeah, you talked about it earlier. Only why don't we listen? You know, you've already talked about it. I know I've talked about it. Other leaders have talked about it on the show. We don't listen for various reasons. One of them, or the main, let's say, category, is we rationalize. We're mentalizing. We're up here and we're neglecting the importance of what you've brought out today: embodiment, feel.
Yeah.
And actually, there's a mental system, there's an emotional system, there's a body system, and an energetic system. Don't only be trapped in one. So this is beautiful. So anything else you want to touch on with your personal experiences with stuck, blocked, interference type, how that showed up for you in terms of this early childhood or getting into an adult? Because, you know, there, as we've talked about leading into the show today, there's a lot of people out there that are caught in the day-to-day, the hustle bustle. I already said it earlier. It can be difficult, or they go, how on earth can I do this? So let's keep unpacking some of this to show how it's possible and inspire.
I would say another something that I would sort of see as an interference is perfectionism, which I think shows up in leadership quite a lot. And you know, for me, again, perfectionism was something that I can trace back to my childhood, because I wasn't necessarily what I consider very particular about things. The environment I was brought up in was a very you know, let's say OCD type-esque environment. So perfectionism was so key, and I never really resonated with that. So I always felt less than perfect. And then what would happen is that then in my, you know, when I first started my artwork, I would have to be very particular with it. Everything had like black lines around it, and it was very contained, you know, like, and also you know, it's one of those where I wouldn't want to show somebody the process of that creation because it felt messy to me. So I only wanted to ever present what I felt was perfect in the line, in a very aesthetically pleasing way. And it really was when I started to do work like that, and it would take me a very long time, did I start to go, oh, you know, like I never considered myself to be perfect, and I certainly didn't extend it to other people. I had a very self-critique going on, which had also come from how I'd been brought up, you know, so I was judging myself. And perfectionism is one of those things that very much box us in, you know, because it's okay to color outside the lines. Yeah. And how often do we get told, you know, even society, you know, collectively, you know, color in the lines or something, you know, it's like, so this kind of interference of perfectionism is kind of, you know, you can look at this in a lot of different ways. That was my experience with it, and I was able to see how that showed up. So even within my creative practice, I had to then free up a bit, you know, explore different ways of doing things. And it was okay to be less than perfect. And I was accepting that of other people. I wasn't really very much accepting it of self. So, you know, that
Well,
there was a bit of
it's easier, right, to do that for others. Any other patterns that you personally experienced or you've seen that you feel inspired to share? Because I feel like we're hitting a lot of the high points. Imposter
I think
syndrome, overanalysis, disassociation. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
so attachments, like for me, would be another one, attachment. So it's a bit like, well, what I've and what I have seen as well. So is this something I would say I'm pretty I feel quite centered as maybe not buying into this as much as I've seen my clients buy into this. So this is attachism to materialism.
You mean like outcomes? Do you mean attachment like attachment disorder? You mean attachment like attachment to expectations, outcomes, focused on materialism?
Yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah, yeah. It's more like, you know, the what's going to get me more stuff, you know, like, you know, so we're talking about lifestyle and things like that. And I had a disattachment to that, which was equally out of alignment as being attached to it. So let's take money, because this is like, you know, like we could all relate to money, you know, we can be attached to it where people would want more of it. And then you have people that are like, well, why do we need it? And kind of consider it as a power hungry, corrupt commodity. Yeah. So I would say I would swing more towards the latter, which was equally the disattachment for something was equally the interference, as much as those that only focus on the self gain is equally their interference by being too attached. Yeah.
So yeah, so there's one side of hyper compensating and there's one side that's hypocompensating. So you're about to describe yours, which was hypocompensating.
So mine was that. And one of the journeys that I had to make was to also be willing to embrace the abundance and the lifestyle that I equally want to create out of doing service work. And so what I started to, you know, the way that I was able to remove those blocks for myself around this is to be very intentional with the fact that, first of all, very open and accepting to live like a very comfortable lifestyle, and to know that that's okay. Like, I'm entitled to have my needs met and to live comfortably and to do the things that I do, because not so much for self gain. My motivation is because it's going to support me doing more service work and reaching more people. And there was like that shift within me where I'm like, okay, in this world, and you know, money is an energy exchange, and those that are choosing to use it for the self gain, you know, that's because that's who they are to start with, potentially, in the sense that they're out of alignment so much that that's what they're, you know, how they're flowing. You know, somebody, you know, I was never very much that way inclined, so it's like money isn't going to corrupt me, you know, because it's the person, not so much the attachment to, you know, not so much the actual money itself, if this makes any sense. So,
well, yeah, you can't. It's almost like, yeah, I feel like there's two sides to it, right? Because as much as it's important to clear a blockage and get the energy flowing again, right, and get back into a natural flow, clear out interferences, so everything's back to its natural organic state of harmonizing and flowing. It's equally as important to make sure you're in a receptive state. You're describing the converse, the receptivity then to the new energies. In this instance, we're speaking of abundance or monetary. So yeah, I agree with you, on that.
the blueprint, or our kind of, you know, original source blueprint will predominantly always align us with the service work, you know, soul fulfillment, fulfilling the mission that we're here to do, which very much is not going to be predominantly ruled by the I. So for as long as we remain centered in what we're doing with the intention of what we then will do, the more abundant we get, the more flow we receive, then obviously we are remaining in alignment with our truth, our original blueprint truth.
This is good stuff. So here we are, we're kind of getting into more of the practices in terms of, okay, so we've covered a lot of territory already in a meaty amount of time. So any other, let's say, spiritual practices, any daily practices, things that you've used to both reignite the creative flow, because you're using the dirty word healing, which I use a lot and we've talked about a lot on the show. Only when people think creativity and imagination, they may not think I need to do healing. Here we have unpacked already in over an hour that, well, the mind, the heart, the body, and the energy body, all four correlate. If they're stuck, blocked, interference, well, the flow is not going to come out. These new ideas, right? They're not going to come through, or they're going to come through and you're not going to have anything to do with them, or you're going to throw them away. You know, the Isaac Newton analogy. Any other practices that we haven't covered that you want to go into that you and I have used? Like, let's say, hey, go out into nature, things like that. What else do you feel like, especially for those that say, Haas, Manya, this is all great. So far, you've given me some stuff I can do right away. I'm too busy even for that. So again, more in the concept of the word. I know you don't like hacks, spiritual hacks, practical life hack type stuff in terms of these spiritual tools they can employ.
Well, yeah. So obviously there's sort of, let me feel into it. I would go barefoot in the garden. So I started to do grounding or earthing, which is the other term that can be used for that, which there is science obviously around that, and the way that it does impact the electromagnetic field, and things like that, and supports like the flow or the irrigation on a biophysical like level, in our blood, that sort of thing. So that was something that I started to do. Yeah. I mean, I'll often go out barefoot, and even now that's something that I do, and that's a very accessible thing that a lot of people are able to do, and there is like a science benefit to it. So that's something that's easy to implement.
What does that do for you when you do it? What does it do for you? Because I know I got downloads for ideas that way. I mean, I literally, this show dropped in as vulnerable power, and I was like, what do I do with that? And that became a show. So for you, what does earthing, grounding, time in nature, whether you do it barefoot to connect with the resonance field?
So say if I'm like feeling, it settles my energy. So if I'm feeling like anxious or disconnected in any way, that's something that will allow me to, you know, remove any anxiety, which obviously means something's like going like this in our bodies so we can calm it. And then also to feel like more connected. And I feel more connected now by also utilizing the grounding, not only connecting to the higher, but making sure I'm bringing it all the way down. And because for me, that was a very big part of what I was missing from my practice, it's now become more important, and I'm prioritizing to do that, because for me, it was bringing the energy all the way down, which was one of the things that I have to
That helps
obviously.
with the embodiment, as you were alluding to earlier. Yeah.
So for me, then the grounding is standing outside with bare feet. Yeah. And then the other thing is affirmations. So you know, like
Well, we
obviously
covered
a
that
lot.
with the clear. So you're saying like more than the clearing, in
Yeah,
addition to the clearing statements.
yeah,
Okay.
because obviously with affirmations, you know, this is when people say I am, and they use the I am. Well, the I am obviously is only connected to the root. The root is the I am. And you actually have to do the affirmation for all of the you know, all of the let's say
Energy
energy.
centers.
So you have like the I feel, the I do, the I see, you know, I love, I speak, you know, I understand, you know, because a lot of us will only, you know, potentially, you know, some people may not be aware of the fact that the I am is only in reference to the lower chakra. And so that was something else then I would also start to be doing. And then the other thing as well was visualization. So instead of, you know, casting my fishing line out to so many possibilities of something, I would really focus on one particular experience that I wanted to feel and to have. And then I would, you know, really focus on that. So before going to sleep, you know, I would create that image as if I was looking at it from a third person. And
Mm.
then as my visualization got stronger, I would be able to project myself into the first person experience. And I wouldn't focus, and it wouldn't be about the how is this going to happen, you know, it would be the moment. So let's say, for example, you know, I wanted to be seeing myself like having an experience near the beach, you know, walking on the
Mm.
beach, then that would be then my image, you know. I'd be like, oh, I would really enjoy some time in near water. Okay, so then I would see this. And so I would create it as like a little photograph and see myself. And then I would put myself in it so I get more of the sensory experience, which in effect, you're kind of like following the feeling, the seeing, the hearing, you know, you really immerse yourself with all of the senses in that moment. And it doesn't take, you know, it took 10 minutes before drifting off to sleep. And so I become more intentional in that way, more focused. What do I want? Which is a great place to start, and something I feel like a lot of people don't actually sit with, you
Mm.
know, what you want,
Mm.
and then can then start the visualization technique. And that's something that I would do. And then
Yeah.
there's the create actually a creative practice to tap into the intuition as
Oh,
well
like
through.
auto writing and stuff like that. Yeah, I would say that last point, it was one of the bigger impacts also you had in terms of influencing me. Because yeah, a lot of people forget the sovereignty they have and the power that they are beholden to. And very few actually take the time, because so many of us will, especially if we're sensitive, let's say, or empathic, will take on from the outside. We'll call those interferences. And once you do clear the blockages and the interferences, you're left with a blank canvas. And few of us have ever actually been told, well, you have the right to now, what do you want? So yeah, I would say that was a very difficult thing for me to experience, because I had never really used my imagination. I'd never really, at least not consciously, intentionally, which is where we're really going with this. It sounds like the difference between escapism and intentional visualization is consciousness, intentionality. It's not draining as much as it is refueling, so to speak. And so, yeah, I would say that's a very important point for those that are listening, that there are times where everybody thinks, so it's all a matter of clearing it out and then it'll all click into place. No, you then have the most daunting task of then declaring, what do I want? And then painting it proverbially. And that, you know, doesn't happen automatically. So this is interesting. So anything else in terms of the theory, the technique? Whoops, almost my carpet flew out from under me. You know, you pulled in Aladdin with all the mind-blowing stuff you're bringing to us. You almost took the magic carpet out from under me. Anything else in terms of the theory, the practical, the mechanics? Let's say, yeah.
well, obviously being creative and sort of artistic as well. I utilize art. And it's such a great access point for people because it bypasses the mental brain. Art is multiversal. It's like a multiversal language. And so it is a tool that I will, bring in. And it's something that I share in my events as how they can
Well, we're
utilize
going
that.
to do that as the exercise. So they're going to actually get to experience that. So let's bring some more. So anything outside of the demonstration we're about to do, anything else from what you felt inspired to, anything you had intended on speaking to, because it seems like kind of the formula that you presented today is you got to actually, if you're stuck, if you're stagnant, if you're like, I don't know how to tap into my imagination or creativity, or how do I do that? And, it sounds like the breaking the pattern is the stillness, right? And we've covered ways. And it sounds like then you got to actually open to this, which is what we're going to then do through the exercise. And then the how it actually comes about takes practice, takes commitment, as you alluded to in this episode. And then it'll flow if you choose for it to flow, which is this exercise of your free will. Anything else? Anything else before we kind of take them into the proverbial exercise? Anything you felt inspired to share? Obviously, they'll be after the exercise, we'll wrap up. So yeah, it's kind of anything else in terms of the almighty Manya Oracle would like to present.
Well, I mean, it's more like a time saving thing that I found particularly useful when I was busy was in order to not cut back on the reading that I wanted to do, I would listen to audiobooks on it, so if you're doing like commuting to and from work and you're doing the school run and stuff, because when we expand our consciousness through like research or new information, that is one way that we can support ourselves of like removing ourselves from a very fixed perception, because we can then like start exploring what else is out there. And quite often people will have, I'm sure you may be one of them, I know I was previously, you have piles of books, you're like, oh, I'm going to read these and stuff, and then it's finding the time, and then our brain will kick in to tell us we don't have enough time to do that. And so I would find audiobooks like great, and really that was one of the earlier things I started to do. I started to like listen to audiobooks, and then alongside that, all the other things, the sort of earlier steps I was taking. And that really expanded my mind because I was listening because of what I was listening to and what I was exposing my consciousness to and stuff. So,
was there any role that play had in any of this? Would you say play was a tool for you? I know that was a big tool for me. Is rekindling my ability to play helped me with my
what I started to do as well, because obviously I had children and stuff, was I would start to fully participate in play with them in order to also bring my inner child through. And so I would not only encourage the imaginative play, I would also become part of it. And I would intentionally give my time to that with them. And I would allow them to lead. So children are very good role models if you allow them to lead you into imagination and creativity. And if you have the opportunity of spending some time with them, and this is something that you struggle with, then as long as you do it in a sense that you're very present and engaged with them, you can learn a lot and allow that to also be the reconnection. Now, also for me, well, because I already had a natural flair for that, I would also bring them into my creative and imaginative world as well, so that life wasn't separate, life became holistic. So I would, implement and embody the learnings that I was experiencing myself along my healing journey, and life didn't become separate, it became more whole, and I included them in that. So I allowed myself to be included in their play, or I would also bring them into my world as well.
Well, I would say that the creative center is the inner child archetype, or that part of us, the divine blueprint, the unjaded part. So I would say that also reactivates. It sounds like, from what I'm hearing, it sounds like that's what you're also reinvoking, right? And I feel like that's what's missing, which is what we touched upon, the correlation of the wounding that happens, let's call it, or the suppression, or the ways we get stuck or blocked from the childhood experiences. And as we lose these parts of ourselves, or we abandon them as we enter adulthood, and then this hustle bustle, then it's like, well, how do I then reactivate that? And then people, then, all of what we've covered, they scoff at it, and, oh, I don't need this. And then it's too late. And then it's like, well, how do I play? And then you see all these clanky adults that don't know how to play because, and I was one of them. I had people, and I've shared this with you, may have shared this on other episodes. Quite a few people say to me, "Oh, you didn't play much as a child, did you?" And, I had bow ties, and I had the converse experience of you. I know I said I would share some of that. So I feel like you encapsulated what my experience was, only it was the converse. I was too much. So then it was constantly finding ways to express the genius. So I masked my genius. Sounds like you suppressed it and escaped into it. I then, it almost became a demon for me, for a lack of a better description, which is probably why it paralleled my body healing, my spinal healing, all of the, outside of the esoterics, which we've covered last season with Janet Richmond's episode. And I know, Janet, and I've met her. I'm speaking only very muggly, very human accidents, stuff, stuff I've talked about on the show before, to kind of holistic, you said holistically, put it all together. So yeah, you hit the nail on the head, a lot of different points, because I feel like wherever you're at in the spectrum, it shows up, the flavor of it shows up similar, whether it was you suppressed it or you were too much or you felt you were too little, however it looked, the mechanisms, let's say, come out the same, the outcome.
And you actually alluded to that, so I love that, is that even as an adult, you can do adult play stuff, so there's the arcades, there's activities and stuff. So there's that. I mean, obviously with the reference with the children, that was like imagination and creativity, if you have the opportunity for that. And then playing generally is definitely a way to loosen up that reconnection to our fun, giggly kind of innocent kind of joyfulness that obviously comes from that inner child archetype and stuff. So
that's oftentimes what gets shut off. I mean, as we've talked about,
as an adult you can also engage in, that can bring about those feelings of playfulness.
Well, the energy is going to go somewhere, as you're alluding to it, right? And it's, if we don't do something with it, and everybody's like, well, how do I get the flow going again? Well, all the things we're alluding to in one way or another, either it interrupts what's blocking the flow, or it starts to irrigate and starts to reactivate the flow. And it's natural, as you said, as I've said, this stuff is natural. It's not like it's a magic formula that I need to become creative. Each person is creative, but even that I'm not creative is in and of itself a blockage, some limiting belief or interference, etc.
People say that to me, oh, I'm not very good at creativity or something.
So now I think is a good point to segue to this. Let's say we've done all these different practical tools, tips, ways, and diagnoses. So now let's bring it into this creativity exercise that you have for us, that I feel is a really cogent way that you bring forth, clearing the stuck blockage energy, let's say, to reactivate the flow. We call it healing. You can say it's healing work. I would say no, it's processing, it's alchemizing, whatever you want to call it, clearing. If you're adverse to healing in the corporate business world. So where do we start, kiddo? How do you want to do this? I'll be the guinea pig. You're going to demonstrate. Let me grab my paper that I know you're going to ask for.
If the audience are following as well, then you'll need a piece of paper, and you will need a pen or some colored or colored crayons, pencils, or something of that kind, if you have any. So the first thing then to do, and I'll do it too, and so I'll lower my my camera so that you can see what I'm doing.
Woo! She's gonna lower her camera.
So we want to draw a straight line on that page, like so, with our pencil to start with. And then
you want us to separate all this talk about holistic. No, I'm teasing you. I'm gonna stop being silly. Go ahead.
You want to sort of do a point where it would represent, let's say, your head, your head, and then obviously the ground. And that's mainly for reference point. So let's say this is feet. Okay, so we have head and feet, and I'll show you like this.
Okay.
Because this line is representing our spinal column, or our golden thread, it's this channel of flow. So now we've got our markers on there. And then we want to take a moment to, feel into, and obviously you can look at your colors as you do this. You want to feel into a color that represents the pain point that is holding you back in your leadership.
Maybe lower the camera or bring it up.
Yep. Okay. I'll throw it down. So
there you go.
no, let's see, because I'm sort of looking at my colors here. Okay. So I'm choosing a red.
So
And
do we want to think about the color? You sorry, I missed your instruction, your initial instruction.
it's more like reflecting. So you're looking at your colors and go for the one that jumps out. So it's very intuitive as well, with less thinking or feeling.
Okay. So pick a color. Look at our colors and pick it. Got it. Cool.
Yeah. And then looking at your line, and again, it's intuitive. So we're not going to, overthink this. You're going to then create a mark that's representing that pain point if it was expressing itself with lines. Okay. So for example, this would be, this is mine.
You move the camera a tiny bit more. Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Now that we're not doing a work of art here, this is an intuitive exploration that you're entering into yourself.
So basically start intuitively drawing on the line where we feel inspired and start doodling with the color we've chosen.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And as you're doing that, obviously the mark making you're choosing to make is a representation of that pain point, how the energy may look or feel to you. Okay. But then what we want to do is we want to take another color. And again, this color now is going to be a color that is representing the healing that we need to bring in to dissolve this pain point or this block. Okay. And again, is the position of where you would want to put that. So for example, I'm going to take, right, I have orange that I have. And my orange is basically coming up from the bottom. And it's kind of it's kind of like it's looking as if it's like a flame or something. My orange is a little lacking in color. For purpose of it showing, I'm going to change my color so that you can see better, basically. So let me do this and then I can show you. So because we've done this without overthinking, and as I said, with creativity, our brain doesn't always get involved. So we intuitively go for colors that we're drawn to, and we've been intentional with where we're putting the focus on. So if I was to, break down, say what mine is represented, first of all, we can see that my pain point that I created, which was in red, I put this quite close to the bottom half of my body. So I know that there is like some sort of root block going on in one of my lower energy centers. Okay.
So you're saying that once you draw it, so this does make sense in a non-making sense way, because in a way it sounds like you're mapping intuitively what energy is stuck or blocked, and then what you need to bring. And it's almost like auto writing or one of these block chart psychological tools, right? Get you out of your head. And it actually allows these other centers to express what is needed, which our body knows. How do we get unstuck?
Because like doing this is really step one. And then in step two, we're going to do the visualization where we kind of alchemize then the very healing that our body is showing us with what we need. Now, the other thing here is that it's showing as, oh, you're releasing that as we're talking. So it's showing that it's, it's very rigid almost. There's something here. And you could say, when I feel into it, it feels like it's actually overthinking. The thing is the overthinking is actually being held in my lower body, my beliefs and experiences. So that's
then it's like an archetypal interpretation. You sit with it and start to unpack it. Yeah.
So my second color that I then chose was orange. So obviously I did it in greens so you're able to see. And it came from the bottom and it was like a flame. So now my body has said to me that to dissolve this, I can bring in an orange flame energy.
That makes sense. Well, yeah. So I mean, for me, it's interesting because, and I know you have the visualization to do, so we'll get to that in a second. It's interesting because I did this, and it is very much for my own healing journey, let's say, or activating my creativity and imagination, in the audience side, oh, how do I do this? Because a lot of my stuff was, I need to do it right. How do I? So art and creativity were always, it was a kind of like tautological for me, snake eating its own tail, because it was the very thing I needed to do is get out of the rule based. And it's like, well, am I doing? The audience may have heard me say, wait, am I doing it? Wait, so you want me to do this, then this? And even now, I mean, this is like not as let loose. So I've gone a long way because I used to freeze up. So if you're in the audience, I'm debriefing for my own sake as well as yours, because I'm like, yeah, I could see how I've grown. At the same time, I could see how I have room to grow in creativity and imagination, because I still have old programs, tapes from siblings, parents, all the stuff we've alluded to on this episode. And then mine archetypally is sacral throat, which is the very thing I'm speaking to. So what do we do now, Maestro? So we've done the first step. This is step one. What do we do now?
A little bit to add about the colors our body chooses, and I sort of mentioned this very briefly.
Vibrational medicine, color medicine, beautiful, yeah.
Because obviously we're made up of different hues. I mean, I think at this point science has proven about our auric field, so we know that there's a color spectrum that is existing around us. And so my interpretation of when we kind of home in on a particular color that appears to resonate, that's because our body is inviting that hue in. It's like it needs that hue to replenish somehow. And so that is, one of the reasons why I kind of guide into like color for the pain point and color for the healing. And so then we have the alchemical process already that we've intuitively, our body is intuitively expressed to us, because our healing journeys are different. And it doesn't necessarily resonate for me to say, oh, if your pain point is this, it will be this color. Correct. Not necessarily. So that's why then it's individual. So it's not.
So you allow their own higher power, let's say, or their intuitive self or soul, whatever you want to call it. Because all of this is.
Yeah.
And then so it's not directive, it's that. Okay. So we've done step one. We look at it, we kind of unpack it, let's say, or meditate on it, and then we go to then part two. So then part two is
with any activity, it's important to incorporate the integration. So in this case, the alchemy that's required, which is then going to transmute, the energy, moving it, dissolving it.
Real quick. So then, and I'll also put in the comments section or in the description, little cheat sheet, since you did bring up the vibrational medicine. So if you're curious, when you did this exercise with us before we get to the visualization, we'll put quick cheat sheet on what these colors mean and some of the biochemistry based on vibrational medicine. Does that work for you? Is that good to put that for them?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So once we've done then this little our little piece of artwork, we are gonna be using this in our visualization. So we're taking this now and actually applying it physically, energetically to our bodies. So we follow up with the visualization where we use the colors and the form making that came through. So to do this, you don't necessarily need to close your eyes, or you can if you want to. You want to put, it may be supportive, and I find for me it is, to place your hands over the area of the body where you would first identified your pain point along your line. And where we also place our hands towards the back, we're also in that moment acknowledging that we have that we hold our experiences and beliefs in the back part of our body, in case that wasn't familiar with people when they are looking at the flow of energy. So we have back and front. So when we do that, we're obviously ensuring we are addressing like the whole area of that area in the body, with the center of the body from our spine. So then we need to close our eyes, after putting our hands there, if you find that supportive. And you want to see that pain point actually in your spine, and it will be in the color and in the shape that you've expressed. And you want to take a moment to like really feel into it. And then you want to start to bring in the healing color as well. So as we bring in the healing color, you're going to then, and the form. So for me, for example, an orange flame, as that comes in, I'm going to start seeing it dissolving away that pain point, that first expression. So you take a moment until you're fully Feel fully complete. And as it dissolves, you're going to see it, being sent to the light. And remembering to continue to breathe deeply and naturally. And when you feel complete with that, we don't want to leave gaps where there was something. So now, and you can leave your hands remaining where they are. We're going to bring down some white light and feeling it traveling all the way down the spine and all the way down into the ground. And as you're breathing in this white light, you breathing it into all of your cells. And then on the exhale, you're expanding it out and radiating out of your body, spreading all throughout your body and beyond. And then when you feel complete, you can bring your awareness back to the room and then sort of slowly open your eyes.
All right. Well, thank you. This has been an action-packed episode. Any final words of wisdom? Anything else you'd like to add to wrap us up?
It's mainly, I suppose, that this journey doesn't have to be done alone, and so it's really important to reach out and to reach out for the support, and the guidance that is available. And obviously, if anything that I have shared, has touched anybody or they'd like to know more, then, they can find my details like in this post. And reach out and connect with me. And obviously, I'm always more than happy to support people. And, I do a free 45-minute consults as well, which allow us to explore how I can support you moving forward and stuff. So
beautiful, beautiful. So this has been an amazing opportunity to demonstrate practical ways that you visionary leaders, wherever you're at on your journey, you can apply these, even if you're busy. Obviously, there's healing applications, and creativity and imagination and our gifts, they intersect with the healing work, because obviously, as we've covered, you got to unpack them. Some of them become suppressed, blocked, distorted, etc., or masked, for a lack of a better description. And so thank you, Manya, for being here. Thank you for you and the audience for participating. Manya and I do a lot of teaching together. We did do a recording that's on this channel. At the end of this video, I will put a link to it, and I'll also put it down below. We're also going to be doing more formal work around this topic of how do you unpack this flow? How do you do that? So check out the details, as she said below, reach out to her, and check out the advanced practice, this activating sacred wisdom. If you like this episode and you want to take it deeper, do the visualization. Like I said, I'll put the link. It's on this YouTube channel as well. And we thank you. Thank you, Manya, for being here. Thank you for sharing more of yourself. I'm glad we got to play some more and bring some more of this practical spiritual wisdom forward for leaders around the world. And yeah, thank you for always sharing of yourself, being of service, and being the wise artist, soul artist, and alchemist that you are.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for having me on the show. I've really enjoyed it. So thank you.
You're welcome. And we look forward to you joining for the rest of the season. Episode 1 in the books of the 4th season. Check out the rest of the season. We're going to have really beautiful stuff. Jeffrey Eisen, who Manya introduced me to, Wolfgang Art. We're going to go really high up there in multidimensionality. And then we're also going to have some people on this season that are going to ground us with research on love and fear and embodiment and breath work and things of that nature. So welcome to the 4th season of the Vulnerable Power Show, where we're going to bring more and more heart and soul to leadership. We'll see you soon. In the meantime, have a blessed, inspired, and creative day ahead.